It's Sunday, March 22nd. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. I just watched the evening news on NBC this evening, and as usual, they did a pretty not so good job of summarizing the day's events. I spent 2.5 hours on a telephone conference call with leaders in the airline industry, union leaders in the airline industry, and various senators that are working in Congress right now to try to get this third stimulus package passed in Congress. We're going to start with that, then we're going to talk about some specific airline details that impacts all of us pilots. The state of the stimulus package has grown. This is the third stimulus package that they're debating right now in Congress. It's gone from $1 trillion to upwards of $1.8 trillion and has failed in the Senate. Now, everything I talk about right now might change by the time it's changing very quickly. It might even be changed by the time I get this published, but here's what we know so far currently. So the $1.8 trillion package in the Senate has failed. They needed 60 votes to pass. They've got all the Democrats and including the two independents gave them 47 no votes versus 47 yes votes. And there are 5 Republican senators that are quarantined and were thus unable to vote. Everybody needs to be present to win. Everybody needs to be in their seat in order to properly vote in the Senate. This is the single biggest stimulus package ever voted on, ever. Everybody needs to be present to vote on this. So it did not pass. Nancy Pelosi is announcing that she's going to work on her own version of the bill in the House, and that may very well cause further delays. Part of this stimulus package that we're talking about is the $50 billion airline bailout, so to speak, package. Also, more on that in a second. Also in this legislation is the individual bailouts that all of us will get as individuals meeting certain income level requirements. And it looks like it's going to be $1,200 per individual, $2,500 per family, and $500 for children. So maybe up to $3,000 for a family of 4. All this is tied up in this current legislation. Those checks are not going out until something gets passed. Also today, there is no desire at this time to ground the entire U.S. fleet of airlines. There's some talk about it, but at this time, they're not talking about implementing that grounding. The amount of this stimulus package that's carved out for the airlines is growing. It initially has been a $50 billion package. Now they're talking along the lines of either $58 billion or maybe even $70 billion. And what the airline pilots unions are arguing is that they want to see this money come in the form of grants rather than loans to the airlines. The unions are afraid that if this money comes in the form of loans to the airlines, that this will just add to the airline's debt load and will eventually drive the airlines back into bankruptcy. The pilots' unions are arguing to see this money in the form of grants, or at least a portion of this money in grants doled out monthly to keep the airline alive each month for the next 6 months, and agrees to the strings attached that include no executive bonuses, no stock buybacks, no dividends, and no layoffs. As part of one of the major strings attached to taking the money from the government for the United States Airlines or for any of these corporations is that the current proposal is proposing that members of the government, I think specifically members from the Treasury, become members of the board of the individual boards, members of the board of the individual corporations that are accepting the money, something that many congressmen are opposing. Another issue that's hitting the airline industry is Class 1 medicals. Every airline pilot is required, like in my case, that's why I'm not flying currently, every airline pilot is required to hold and maintain a Class 1 flight physical. That Class 1 flight physical is good for only 6 months. With the current medical situation going on, pilots are being unable to get into medical professionals to renew their Class 1 medicals. If you do not have your Class 1 medical, you are grounded. You can't fly. You cannot earn any money. You're out. You're on the sick list. So they are looking at a possible extension of 60, possibly up to 90 days for your Class 1 medical before it lapses. Now remember, a Class 1 medical lapses to a Class 2 medical, which is good for a year. That lapses to a Class 3 medical, which is good for 2 years. But in order to fly Part 121 airliners, you gotta have and maintain a Class 1 medical. That's the only medical that works for airline pilots. Now let's talk about some of these airline-specific leaves of absences. Remember, in a previous update, we talked about 3 different options: a short-term leave of absence, a middle 1-year-long leave of absence, and a permanent leave of absence. The permanent leave of absence for airline pilots at American Airlines is being offered to pilots that are age 62 or older by the 1st of May. There is apparently some good amount of interest in these permanent leaves of absences, but one of the big questions everybody has is, what happens if you take a permanent leave of absence and the airline subsequently goes bankrupt? The answer is that the permanent leave of absence will be agreed to along the lines of the collective bargaining agreement. It will be under the collective bargaining agreement. And in order to abrogate that agreement, a bankruptcy judge would have to approve the abrogation or the throwing out of that agreement. So personally, I think that means you got a pretty good chance of hanging on to your permanent leave of absence income in the event of an airline bankruptcy. It would take a bankruptcy judge to throw that out. Another question that came up: can you furlough out of seniority? And the answer is no. Neither the company nor the union, obviously, agreement is that you cannot furlough out of seniority, nor is the company training apparatus set up to furlough out of seniority. You can furlough. How do I explain that? We'll just leave it at that. Some fleet-specific news: the Boeing 7576 fleet of aircraft at American Airlines, they're accelerating that retirement. That fleet will be gone by the end of May. Regarding your April schedules, those schedules will be reduced, and they're still scrambling to work on reducing those schedules. Regarding the bidding for these leaves of absences, they are going to start bidding for this as early as Monday. There will be a 48 or 72-hour window period that you can place your bid. You can change your bid as many times as you like during that window, and then the window closes. But there will be multiple windows of opportunity, multiple opportunities to bid on leaves of absences. It will be up to the union will administer the bidding. The company will determine the numbers of those that get to take advantage of these absences based on desire, demand. Currently, at this moment, there is no talk of bankruptcy and no talk of furloughs at American Airlines. If you bid and are awarded a permanent leave of absence, that's permanent. You cannot come back and change your bid status anytime later. You are effectively retired until your retirement age, if that makes any sense. You are also immune from losing your Class 1 medical and going on to long-term disability status because you're no longer flying the line. So those are some of the big issues that were talked about in an over 2.5 hour long phone conversation. Once we cut through all the senators filibustering, that's what we needed to know in the end of 2.5 hours. I hope that helped you. See you here. All of this is subject to change by tomorrow morning.